He didn't even look me in the eye when he did it. Thomas stood at the front of the glass-walled conference room, sunlight catching the silver in his tie clip, voice smooth and rehearsed like he was announcing a promotion rather than destroying my career. "Effective immediately," he said, pausing for effect. "Danielle will be transitioning into a more supportive role while we restructure our leadership pipeline to better align with our evolving strategic priorities." Supportive role? Leadership pipeline? These were the corporate euphemisms people used when they wanted to dress up betrayal in business casual. I blinked. Just once. Not fast. Not wide-eyed. Just enough to keep from showing what was really happening in my chest, because in that moment, it wasn't confusion. It wasn't shock. It was fire. Rage, clean and cold and crystallizing into something sharp. This was my campaign. My pitch deck. My late nights and early mornings and weekends sacrificed. My strategy that landed us the biggest client we'd ever had, a multinational worth $15 million in annual revenue. And now, in front of my team, the client representatives, and the junior staff I'd mentored for years, he was stripping it all away. No warning. No explanation. No private conversation beforehand. Just public humiliation, wrapped in corporate speak and delivered with a smile. No one said a word. Not even Maya, who had been working under me for 2 years and knew exactly who built this thing from the ground up. She'd shadowed every pitch call, learned my frameworks, borrowed my contacts. Her eyes dropped to the floor like she'd rehearsed it, like she'd known this was coming and had already decided which side of history she wanted to be on. I heard my own heartbeat in my ears, steady and loud like a war drum. I smiled. And I mean really smiled, the kind that stretches your face a second too long and makes your jaw ache because if you don't hold it, your whole body might crack open and reveal the volcano underneath. I said nothing. Just nodded once and folded my hands in my lap like a good little team player. Let them think I was stunned. Let them feel superior. Let them think they'd won and that I'd slink away quietly, maybe cry in the bathroom, maybe start job hunting by lunch. Because right then, in the middle of that betrayal, in the heat of my humiliation, I remembered something Thomas forgot I knew. 3 years ago. A locked room. A deal gone bad. A report falsified and buried. Numbers that didn't add up and paperwork that mysteriously disappeared. And a file I still had, sitting in an encrypted folder with a boring name that no one would ever think to look for. The second the meeting ended, the room emptied like someone pulled a fire alarm. Chairs scraped against polished floors. Papers shuffled. Laptops snapped shut. Nobody looked at me. Not really. They gave me that careful, corporate smile, the kind people wear when they want to look like they're on your side without actually being caught standing next to you when things get messy. Even Maya, sweet, ambitious, 27-year-old Maya who used to beg to shadow my pitch calls and asked me to review her presentations, bolted for the hallway without a word. She didn't even take her laptop. Just grabbed her phone and disappeared into the elevator bay like the room was on fire. That stung more than I expected. I'd spent hours coaching her, introducing her to my network, teaching her the unspoken rules of client management that no one bothers to write down. And now she couldn't even look at me. I moved slowly, deliberately, gathering my things like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't just been publicly dressed down by a man who used to ask me to rephrase things in my tone for client meetings, because mine was the only voice they trusted. The same man who once told me I had the perfect mix of authority and approachability, and then apparently decided I had too much of the former. As I zipped up my folio, I felt it, the shift of air, the presence behind me. Thomas. His hand landed on the back of my chair. Light. Casual. Like he hadn't just gutted me with a smile 30 seconds earlier. "Let's catch up later this week," he murmured, his mouth too close to my ear, his cologne expensive and suffocating. "This isn't personal, Danielle. You're still incredibly valued here. This is just about organizational efficiency." I tilted my head up to him. Smiled. "Of course. I understand completely." But in that moment, I realized something crucial. He was nervous. Not a lot. Not enough that anyone else would notice. But I saw it. His jaw was tight. His eyes didn't stay on mine, they flicked to the door, then to his watch, then back to me. And his hand, the one on my chair, it twitched once before he pulled it away. Good. He should be nervous. I walked past him without another word, heels clicking against the tile like a metronome, steady and clean and purposeful. I didn't go back to my desk. I didn't go to the break room to face the pitying looks or the careful distance. I went straight to the stairwell, the one without cameras, the one people only used during fire drills, and I sat on the concrete landing with my phone in my hand and a pressure in my chest like I was going to explode. And I cried. Just for 5 seconds. Just enough to let the pressure valve release before I put the mask back on. Just enough to acknowledge that yes, this hurt, and yes, it was unfair, and yes, I was allowed to feel that for exactly 5 seconds before I turned it into fuel. Then I opened my notes app and typed, Thomas touched my chair. Said it wasn't personal. Called it organizational efficiency. HR will call this supportive restructuring. Meeting attendees, full leadership team, client reps from Morrison Tech, junior staff including Maya R., Kevin M. Timestamped. Logged. Documented. This wasn't sadness. It wasn't confusion. It was documentation. I wasn't spiraling. I was building my case. It didn't start with the demotion. It started in a hotel bar 2.5 hours outside the city, during the company's annual leadership offsite, the kind of forced bonding event where everyone pretends cucumber water and artisan charcuterie makes up for 12-hour PowerPoint boot camps and trust fall exercises that nobody trusts. We'd finished dinner. Wine was flowing freely. Thomas was telling a story I'd heard before, about landing some legacy client back in his early 30s through sheer determination and creative thinking. Everyone was laughing, too loud, too eager, the way people do around men who can change the course of your career with a single sentence or a single email to the executive committee. I was sitting at the bar with a sparkling water and a hotel-branded coaster under my thumb, listening but not engaging. I'd always kept it clean at these events. No one remembers the woman who leaves early and goes to bed at a reasonable hour. They remember the one who drinks too much and dances and gives people ammunition. He sat next to me, uninvited. You don't drink? He asked, swirling a deep amber bourbon like he wanted me to notice how expensive it looked, how refined his taste was. Not tonight, I said, still polite, still professional. I didn't look away. He liked power. So I let him see I wasn't afraid of him, that I could hold eye contact, that I belonged in this space just as much as he did. Thomas smiled, that practiced, slow smile men give when they think they've found an opening, when they think they've identified weakness or opportunity. You know, he said, leaning in just slightly, voice dropping half an octave, I've always appreciated how low maintenance you are. No drama. No noise. Just results. It's refreshing, honestly. So many people here need constant validation. I didn't say anything. Just tilted my head, like I was trying to decide whether it was a compliment or a red flag wrapped in flattery. Then he said it, I always feel like I can be more honest with you than other people. Like we're on the same wavelength, you know? And his hand landed low on my back. Not low like supportive. Not the kind of touch you'd give a colleague. Low like deliberate. Low like a claim. I didn't move. Not right away. I let it sit there long enough for him to feel it, the tension, the awareness, the line being crossed. Long enough for there to be no question about what was happening. Then I stood up. Calmly. No scene. No reaction. No dramatic exit that would become office gossip by Monday morning. I'm calling it a night, I said, grabbing my room key from the bar. Big day tomorrow. Need to be sharp for the strategy session. His hand lingered a second too long as it slid off my back. He chuckled, like it was all a joke. Like I was the one overthinking it, being too sensitive, not understanding workplace camaraderie. Don't be so serious, Danielle. We're all friends here. I didn't look back. And I didn't sleep. Because that night, I knew something fundamental had shifted. The rules had changed. And I was no longer playing the game I thought I was playing. I thought that moment was the worst of it. I thought rejecting him would be enough. That he'd feel embarrassed and back off, that we'd return to professional distance and pretend it never happened. I really believed that. Until the Monday after, when I found out the 10 a.m. pitch meeting I'd been preparing for, the one I'd built from scratch, researched for weeks, the one that could open doors to an entire new market segment, had been reassigned to Maya. No explanation. No notice. No courtesy heads up. Just gone. That was the first cut. The first indication that consequences were coming. The first time it happened, I told myself it was a mistake. A scheduling conflict. A miscommunication in a busy season. I opened the latest draft of the client pitch, the one I'd spent 2 weeks perfecting, the one where I'd restructured our entire value proposition, and found that my name had been removed from the deck footer. No credit. No version history notes. Just gone, like I'd never touched it. Instead, the file was saved under Maya's initials with her listed as primary author. I blinked, stared at the screen, and thought, maybe it was a formatting update. Maybe she duplicated the wrong version by accident. Maybe I'm overreacting and seeing patterns that aren't there. Then it happened again. And again. And again. By the third time, I stopped pretending it was accidental. One by one, my fingerprints were being wiped off every project I'd led. My slides rewritten with slightly different language. My bullet points reordered. My talking points mysteriously forgotten in final presentations. My strategic frameworks attributed to the team rather than to me specifically. And when I brought it up, calmly, casually, during a Tuesday check-in with Thomas, he gave me the smile. That same smile from the off-site bar. The one that said, careful. You raise your voice, and you'll be the problem. You push this, and you'll be the difficult one. You make this about you, and you'll prove why we were right to sideline you. Let's not get territorial, Danielle, he said, flipping through my printed brief like it was a high school essay he was grading. The best ideas rise to the top, no matter who they come from. That's what collaboration means. We're a team here. I wanted to scream. I wanted to slam my hand on the desk and demand he acknowledge what he was doing. I wanted to call it what it was, retaliation, erasure, punishment for not playing along. But I didn't. I smiled back. Nodded. Said, you're absolutely right. Team first. And then I emailed the document to myself, the original one. The one with my track changes, my revision history, my initials on every strategic decision. Time-stamped. Archived. Quiet. Because I was learning the most important lesson of corporate warfare, they'll use your silence against you, but they'll also use your voice against you. The only weapon they can't take away is documentation. A few days later, I was pulled into a meeting with HR. Apparently someone, anonymous, of course, had flagged me for being uncooperative with team collaboration and resistant to feedback. I sat across from the rep, Jen, 30-something, soft voice, clipboard and concerned face perfected through years of delivering bad news with a smile, and I realized something that chilled me to the bone. They weren't checking in on me. They were building a file. Creating a paper trail. Establishing a narrative that would justify whatever came next. We just want to make sure you're feeling supported, Jen said, pen poised over her clipboard like she was about to prescribe corporate therapy. Change can be difficult, and we want to ensure you have the resources you need to adapt to your new role. My new role. The one I never applied for. The one I never agreed to. The one they gave me in front of everyone as punishment for not being complicit. I smiled. Said all the right things. Expressed gratitude for the concern. Mentioned how much I valued being part of the team. promised to be more flexible and collaborative going forward. I walked out of that meeting with a fake smile on my face and a decision burning inside me like a pilot light waiting for gas. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't misinterpreting signals or being oversensitive. I was being erased. Systematically. Deliberately. With institutional support. And I was going to make them regret ever thinking I'd stay quiet about it. I didn't storm into HR with a folder full of receipts and a list of demands. That's what they expected. That's what they were prepared for. The angry woman. The emotional outburst. The easy dismissal. Instead, I made an appointment. I used neutral language. I kept my voice calm, professional, measured, the way women have to be when they're walking into a room that wasn't built for them, following rules that were written to protect everyone except them. Jen greeted me with that same clipboard smile and offered me tea like I was there for a wellness check rather than to report what was happening to me. I didn't say Thomas harassed me. I didn't even mention the off-site, the hand on my back, the implications that hung in the air like smoke. I talked about the demotion. The project reassignment. The way I'd been systematically excluded from calls I used to lead. The sudden change in tone and treatment. I called it a concerning shift in workplace culture, because saying targeted retaliation gets you labeled difficult, emotional, someone who can't handle feedback. Jen nodded like she cared. Took notes like they mattered. Then she said, "It's important not to assume intent, Danielle. Sometimes leadership has to make tough calls for the good of the team. These decisions aren't always about any one person, they're about organizational needs." I smiled. Because I knew what that meant. It meant they were never going to protect me. Not from him. Not from anyone with more power, more tenure, more access to the executive suite. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed. But I didn't push. I didn't cry. I didn't say, "I know what this is and I know where it's going and I know you're complicit." Instead, I thanked her for her time. I said I understood the complexity of organizational decisions. I asked her to keep me in the loop about any developments. And as I left the room, I casually glanced down at her clipboard. There was already a form started with my name at the top. Categories checked. Concerns documented. They'd been preparing for this conversation before I ever walked in. That night, I started moving everything out of my work email, every file, every message, every slide deck, every piece of correspondence that proved my contributions. I created a clean private archive on an encrypted drive. I even took pictures of my whiteboard where I'd mapped out campaign strategies. Printed my notebooks. Rebuilt timelines with dates and deliverables. Not because I needed proof they were hurting me. Because I needed to prove I'd never given them a reason to. I wasn't just documenting abuse. I was building my alibi. Creating an unassailable record of competence, contribution, and professionalism that would make it impossible for them to claim I deserved what was happening. It was 3 years ago. Late October. The office mostly empty except for a handful of overachievers and people trying not to go home to whatever was waiting there. I was still a mid-level strategist back then. Hungry. Tired. Still convincing myself that working 70 hours a week would one day buy me peace, security, the corner office I'd been promised if I just kept my head down and delivered results. Thomas stopped by my desk at 9:42 p.m. I remember the time because I'd just emailed my team a revised timeline with that exact subject line. I'm the kind of person who remembers the boring details, not because I'm obsessive, but because no one ever questions the woman with perfect records. He looked panicked. That was rare for Thomas, who normally projected confidence like it was cologne. "I need your help," he said, already walking toward the smaller, windowless conference room. The one with the broken door lock facilities had never bothered to fix because nobody important ever used it. Inside, he closed the door anyway. Pulled the blinds. Sat down across from me like we were co-conspirators in something that hadn't happened yet but was about to become my problem. Then he laid it out. A client rebrand had gone sideways, big client, big money, big potential fallout. The numbers didn't match the proposal. The paperwork didn't match the deliverables. There were files missing, invoices that had been altered, and Thomas's name all over a trail that led to nowhere good and potentially illegal. He told me it was an internal miscommunication. A series of unfortunate errors. Nothing malicious, just sloppiness that needed to be corrected before the quarterly audit. He told me I was the only one he trusted to help clean it up. That I had the attention to detail and discretion necessary for sensitive work like this. And like a fool, like someone who still believed loyalty mattered, that helping your boss meant he'd remember it when opportunities came, I did. I restructured the report. Merged conflicting files. Rewrote the narrative to smooth over inconsistencies. It took 2 days of silent, meticulous work to make the damage disappear. No paper trail. No emails. Just a clean, perfect version of the truth that saved his career, and made it look like the whole thing never happened. But here's the thing, I kept the originals. Not because I didn't trust him, not then. But because I've worked in corporate environments long enough to know something most people don't, the truth is never as powerful as the receipts. Memory fades. People lie. But data doesn't. I zipped the folder, renamed it something boring, Q3 Legacy Rebrand Archive Final, and moved it into a private drive under an old intern's ID that no one ever deactivated when she left the company. Then I forgot about it. Until the moment Thomas demoted me in front of everyone, and I felt my body go still with rage and clarity. He thought I was just another woman he could step over. Another career he could sacrifice to protect his own. He forgot I was the one who taught him how to cover his tracks. And I still knew exactly where all the footprints were buried. They didn't even have the decency to wait a week. 2 days after my demotion, 48 hours, I got an Outlook invite titled, Onboarding Support, Kevin M. I stared at the calendar notification like it was a joke someone had planted to see if I'd finally break. It wasn't. Kevin had been with the company for less than 6 months. Came from a different industry. Nice enough guy, eager to please, always smiling a little too hard during leadership meetings like he was auditioning for approval. And now he was my replacement. Not officially, of course. They'd call it a transition partnership or knowledge transfer. But we both knew what it was. The subject line made me laugh out loud in my empty office. Onboarding support, as if I were stepping aside voluntarily, gracefully passing the torch like some benevolent mentor who was just happy to be included in the process. I clicked accept and began preparing. When Kevin walked into the meeting room the next morning, he was sweating through his shirt despite the aggressive air conditioning. I almost felt bad for him. He looked at me the way a temp looks at the woman they're quietly replacing, like he wasn't sure if I was going to sabotage him or cry or make some dramatic scene that would get him caught in the crossfire. I just want to say, he started, setting down his coffee with hands that weren't quite steady, I really respect what you built here. I know this is weird. I smiled. Not the fake corporate smile. Something closer to genuine amusement. Of course you do. You're about to run it. He laughed, awkward, nervous, too loud for the small room. I spent the next 2 hours making him a comprehensive list of everything he needed to succeed. Contacts with direct phone numbers. File locations with folder hierarchies. Client expectations and preferences. Vendor names and their quirks. I even emailed him templates I'd personally designed, frameworks that had won us millions in business. Every single item I gave him was technically accurate. But I left things out. Little things. The unsaid preferences. The real power dynamics between client stakeholders. The landmines. The unwritten rules about who actually makes decisions versus who pretends to. The relationships that mattered versus the ones that were just for show. Things only someone with actual experience, years of building trust, reading rooms, understanding subtext, could navigate successfully. And I watched. I watched as Kevin used my frameworks and failed to read the room. I watched him fumble with vendors I'd spent years cultivating, not understanding that the secret to the relationship was remembering birthdays and asking about kids. I watched a client literally roll their eyes when he said, "I'll check with the team and circle back," instead of making a decision in the moment like I would have. And every time he messed up, I was in the room, supportive, helpful, smiling just enough to look innocent. Offering suggestions that were technically correct but came too late to matter. Being visible enough that no one could say I didn't help, but not helpful enough to actually save him. They thought this would break me. Make me bitter. Make me quit in frustration and save them the trouble of managing me out. But I wasn't bitter. I was studying. Studying how quickly Thomas would throw someone else under the bus when things got messy. Studying how sloppy they all were when no one expected the demoted woman to be watching. Studying how power moves through a system that was built to protect men like him, how quickly that protection evaporates when results start slipping. They handed me the perfect disguise, quiet, compliant, irrelevant. So I used it. And the whole time? I kept notes. I used to think Amanda had my back. We'd started at the company the same year, survived 2 reorganizations, 3 department heads, and a scandal involving a VP and a mysteriously broken office security camera. We'd split appetizers and complained about management and shared war stories about impossible clients. She was in my corner. At least, that's what I thought. Until I wasn't useful anymore. "Things are getting complicated," she said one afternoon, eyes flicking toward the glass wall behind me, toward Thomas's office where the blinds were conspicuously closed. "I just think maybe you need to focus on your own energy right now. You know, protect your peace." My energy? My peace? I wanted to ask if she meant the meetings I wasn't invited to anymore. The projects I'd been systematically cut from. The emails I was mysteriously left off of. Or the ghost town inbox I checked every morning hoping for something, anything, that would indicate I still mattered here. Instead, I nodded. "You're probably right." Because what she was really saying was crystal clear: I can't be seen standing next to you anymore. Your failure might be contagious. Your situation might spread to me if I'm associated with you. And that's when I knew, this wasn't just about Thomas. The system was protecting him. And everyone in the system was protecting themselves by proxy. I was in this alone. I waited 3 weeks before reaching out to Michael. He used to work in our legal department before jumping to a better firm. Smart. Quiet. Respected by everyone who mattered. He owed me a favor from years ago when I'd helped him navigate a client crisis that could have ended his career. We met for coffee in a crowded cafe 40 minutes from the office, somewhere nobody from our company would accidentally wander in during lunch. I didn't give names. I laid out a hypothetical situation involving harassment, systematic retaliation, and a file that could potentially destroy someone's career if it ever came to light in the wrong context. He leaned back, sipped his espresso slowly, and studied me with the kind of careful attention lawyers give when they're calculating liability and risk. "If you have documentation," he said finally, voice low enough that the neighboring tables couldn't hear, "and you've been systematically targeted for refusing advances, that's not HR's territory anymore. That's not an internal matter they can mediate and bury. That's liability. That's exposure. That's the kind of thing that makes companies settle quickly and quietly." I didn't react. Didn't smile. Didn't let him see the satisfaction blooming in my chest. But that was the moment I stopped feeling cornered. And started feeling dangerous. I didn't go nuclear. Not yet. Not when surgical precision would work better. I just started dropping hints. Breadcrumbs. Little questions that made people look twice at things they'd previously accepted. A vendor invoice flagged for overbilling, nothing dramatic, just a polite question in an email chain about whether the hours matched the deliverables. A financial discrepancy I accidentally CC'd the wrong executive on, a simple spreadsheet error that happened to show inconsistencies in how the rebrand budget had been allocated. A budget file left unlocked in a shared folder where anyone looking would find anomalies between what was promised and what was delivered. Small cracks in the wall. Just enough for people to start wondering if the golden boy was really all that golden. Just enough to plant seeds of doubt. I never attached a conclusion. Never made an accusation. Just a question. A curiosity. A friendly heads up about something that seemed off. Let them dig. Let them connect dots. Let them feel like they discovered it themselves. Thomas asked me to lunch. His smile was tight. His cufflinks matched his watch, both expensive, both designed to signal success and power. We've had a rough couple months, he said, sipping his scotch like we were old war buddies reminiscing about battles we'd fought together. But I want you to know, I see your value. I've always seen your value. I nodded. Let him talk. Let him spin his narrative about organizational pressures and difficult decisions and how none of this was personal. He told me I'd always be part of the foundation of this company. That my contributions hadn't been forgotten. That there might be opportunities down the road if I stayed patient and kept my head down. Then I asked him, casually, like it had just occurred to me, how did the Q3 rebrand from 3 years ago hold up in the audits? I've been thinking about that project lately. We did good work on that. His glass paused mid-air. Only for a second. A fraction of a moment. But I saw it. The flicker of recognition. The calculation. The question forming, why is she asking about that? What does she remember? What does she have? Then he laughed. Forced. What made you think of that old thing? I just smiled. Shrugged. Just reminiscing. You know how it is. Sometimes you think about projects that taught you important lessons. The subtext hung between us like smoke. A junior staffer, Greg, 24, fresh out of grad school, was fired over a $300 expense error. The kind of error that normally gets a warning email. Maybe a stern conversation. Not termination. I knew what that meant. Thomas was cleaning house. Tying up loose ends. Shifting blame. Making room for a storm he could feel coming but couldn't quite identify yet. I moved faster. I dug up old email chains from the rebrand project, tracked version histories that showed who changed what and when, printed archived invoices from my personal backups that I'd kept in that forgotten folder. And I watched the company shrink around him. One tiny tear at a time. I proposed a new campaign. Simple. Bold. Profitable on paper, and built to fail catastrophically if mishandled by someone who didn't understand the underlying cost structures and vendor relationships. Thomas loved it. Called it, exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need right now. He approved it without reading the second draft thoroughly, the one where I hid 3 cost structure inconsistencies that would only become apparent 6 weeks into execution. When the numbers didn't add up and the client started asking uncomfortable questions, he blamed Kevin. Called it a failure of execution. Poor attention to detail. I let him. Watched him throw Kevin under the bus with the same ease he'd used on me. Because that document? The one with all the flaws? It had his digital signature on it. His approval. His executive authorization. And I had copies. Time-stamped. Archived. I started making mistakes. Small ones. Strategic ones. Wrong file names that required someone senior to track down the correct version. Missed attachments on emails that forced follow-up. A few accidental CCs to the wrong people that exposed internal disagreements. Thomas cleaned up after me every time. Because that's what you do when you're trying to prove someone is incompetent, you fix their mistakes and document the pattern. And each time he did, he exposed himself to more liability. Modified files that now had his fingerprints on them. Overrode budget approvals in ways that contradicted previous versions. Sent confirmation emails that created inconsistencies in the paper trail. I let him bury himself in his own lies, his own need to control the narrative. HR asked for another wellness check-in. Jen was there again. The clipboard. The soft voice. The corporate concern painted on her face like stage makeup. We've heard feedback that you seem disengaged lately. Is everything okay? Are you feeling supported in your current role? I smiled. Nodded. Said all the right things. I'm just trying not to rock the boat. Focusing on being a team player. She seemed satisfied. Made notes. Told me she was glad we had this conversation. I recorded the whole thing on my phone, sitting in my lap, audio running. Just in case they ever tried to say I was combative, or resistant, or any of the other words they used to justify pushing women out. I filed an anonymous tip with the internal audit team. Used a burner email created from a coffee shop Wi-Fi network. Attached 3 redacted documents that raised questions about the rebrand project from 3 years ago. No accusations. Just questions. Inconsistencies that merited review. 2 weeks later, a quiet investigation began. The kind that starts with requests for old files and ends with lawyers in conference rooms. And Thomas still didn't know I was the one who lit the match. I compiled it all over the course of 6 weeks. Emails with metadata intact. Financial inconsistencies with supporting documentation. Meeting notes with dates and attendees. HR interactions with transcripts and recordings. The entire rebrand scandal with before and after versions of every document. All organized under a single name, Whitaker, Timeline of Misconduct and Retaliation. I printed 3 copies on high-quality paper. Saved 2 encrypted backups in separate cloud services. Created a dead man switch that would email everything to the board and the company's law firm if I didn't check in every 72 hours. Then I waited. Finance flagged the discrepancies I'd built into the decoy campaign. Thomas tried to spin it. Blamed Kevin again. Called it a failure of middle management. Said he'd been clear about expectations and someone had dropped the ball. But one of the spreadsheets, the wrong one, the one I'd made sure got included in the review packet, had metadata showing it originated from Thomas's laptop. His revisions. His changes. His approval of numbers that didn't work. I didn't plant it. I just made sure it got included in the audit request. He did the rest himself. One of our legacy clients called me directly on my cell phone. Not Thomas. Not Kevin. Me. Even though I'd been officially removed from their account months ago. Danielle, she said, voice tight with frustration, why did the branding language change halfway through our campaign? This isn't what we agreed to. This isn't what you pitched. I paused. Chose my words carefully. I was removed from the project back in March. Perhaps Thomas or Kevin can clarify the strategic rationale. She didn't call back. But she did cancel their next contract. $3 million in annual revenue, gone in one email. Thomas started unraveling. Snapping at interns over minor mistakes. Pacing during meetings instead of sitting still. Overcompensating with aggressive confidence that fooled nobody. He demoted 2 more people in the span of a week. Both sudden. Both public. Both clearly desperate attempts to show he was still in control. HR panicked. The pattern was too obvious now. The liability too clear. Finance requested a full internal review of all projects Thomas had overseen in the past 5 years. And I just kept showing up. Quiet. Smiling. Composed. Professional.